In early July, South Korea's judicial system delivered a resounding message. Political privilege no longer guarantees immunity from the rule of law. After a brief reprieve of 124 days, former President Yoon Seok-yeol was once again taken into custody. The Seoul Central District Court approved his arrest, citing the risk that he might tamper with evidence or attempt to flee the country. Yoon's return to detention marked a dramatic reversal of fortune. Just months earlier, he had made a desperate gamble, invoking martial law in what was widely viewed as an attempted coup. His justification? A deep belief that, like many of his predecessors, he would ultimately be pardoned. That assumption may prove to be his greatest miscalculation. South Korea has a long history of post-presidential leniency. In the year 1997, former military leaders Chun Do-hwan and Roh Tae-woo were convicted of rebellion and responsibility for the Gwangju massacre. Both were sentenced to severe punishments, including the death penalty. But within months, they were granted clemency under the guise of national reconciliation. That precedent became a pattern. In 2017, President Park Geun-hye was impeached and sentenced to 20 years in prison for corruption. She was pardoned in 2021. In 2020, former President Lee Myung-bak received a 17-year sentence for embezzlement and bribery, only to be pardoned 2 years later by Yoon Seok-yeol himself. This revolving door of accountability has led to a widely held belief in South Korean politics. No matter how serious the crime, the next administration may grant clemency in the name of stability. Yoon Seok-yeol relied on that belief. He assumed that, like Chun and Roh before him, even a military intervention would not permanently end his political relevance. But this time, circumstances have changed. There are 3 major reasons why Yoon's path is unlikely to mirror that of his predecessors. First is the overwhelming shift in public sentiment. 1 month before he declared martial law, a national opinion survey put Yoon's approval rating at only 17%. Following the declaration, that number fell even further, to 11%. These figures are not merely low, they reflect a near-total erosion of support outside his core conservative base. Public backlash was swift and sustained. More than 3 out of every 4 citizens supported the Constitutional Court's decision to remove Yoon from office. This level of national consensus is rare in South Korean politics and leaves little room for the kind of leniency offered in the past. In contrast, previous presidents retained at least partial public sympathy, often due to their policy accomplishments. Yoon, however, departed office amid accusations of economic mismanagement, diplomatic stumbles, and authoritarian overreach. Additionally, the scale and symbolism of the coup attempt intensified public anger. For many South Koreans, the declaration of martial law and deployment of drones evoked a regression to past military rule, a chapter of history the country has spent decades trying to close. In a nation that has fought hard to preserve democratic norms, Yoon's actions represented a serious betrayal. Second, the political environment has shifted decisively away from conservative leadership. Yoon's party suffered a devastating defeat in the legislative elections of April 2024, recording one of the worst outcomes for any ruling party in recent memory. Internal divisions quickly surfaced, with conservative leaders unable to unify around a successor. A leadership contest between Kim Moon-ju and others exposed deep fractures, leaving the party without a clear direction. In the presidential race that followed, Lee Jae-myung won by a historic margin, defeating Kim by more than 12 percentage points. The widest gap ever recorded in a South Korean presidential election. With the conservative camp in disarray, Yoon no longer has a political faction powerful enough to secure a pardon on his behalf. What's more, the leadership vacuum within the Conservative Party has left many of its traditional supporters disillusioned. Political instability within the right has led to debates over ideology, leadership style, and future direction. In this climate, few politicians are willing to spend political capital defending a disgraced former president, particularly one accused of undermining democratic institutions. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the context is different. South Korea in the 2020s is not the same nation it was in the 1980s. Back then, democratic institutions were still maturing, and public scrutiny was limited by a lack of independent media and technology. Today, the internet, social media, and live streaming platforms make it nearly impossible to hide political misconduct. Yoon's actions, including the imposition of martial law and the reported use of surveillance drones, were recorded, broadcast, and dissected in real time. The public saw everything. And so did the courts. In a landmark decision, the Constitutional Court voted 8-0 to uphold Yoon's impeachment. That level of judicial unanimity signals more than legal clarity. it marks a turning point in South Korea's political maturity. President Lee Jae-myung has vowed not to repeat the mistakes of the past. In May, he stated unequivocally that he would not pardon Yoon under any circumstances, even if he is sentenced to life in prison. The reason, he said, is simple: the law must have authority, and future leaders must be deterred from crossing constitutional boundaries. In other words, this is no longer just about Yoon Seok-yeol. It is about drawing a legal and moral line to protect South Korea's democracy for future generations. Yoon has not yet received a final sentence, but prosecutors have indicated that life imprisonment, or theoretically the death penalty, may be sought. Although South Korea has not carried out a capital punishment sentence in decades, such a ruling would reflect the symbolic weight of the case. At present, Yoon is housed in a 9-square-meter cell at the Seoul Detention Center, without a bed or air conditioning. As temperatures soar in the capital, the contrast between his former status and current conditions could not be starker. Unlike former presidents who received special treatment, Yoon's impeachment strips him of any privileged status. Legally, he is now a private citizen facing charges of rebellion. Still, Yoon's story may not yet be finished. Although he has lost institutional power, he still retains connections across the political landscape. Allies from his time in office, and even some holdouts within the conservative bloc, may try to influence future proceedings. Some speculate that a health-related appeal, similar to the one used to justify Lee Myung-bak's early release, could be used to ease Yoon's confinement if medical conditions arise. Medical parole, especially in a high-profile case, would undoubtedly provoke public criticism. But it remains a technical possibility, and in South Korea, where politics often shifts with public mood, few outcomes can be ruled out entirely. Moreover, South Korean presidents have historically faced uncertainty after leaving office. The job remains one of the most perilous in global politics, with nearly every president since the 90s either imprisoned, impeached, or investigated. While Lee Jae-myung has so far governed with resolve, questions may eventually arise about how he will navigate his own political sunset. And so, observers inside and outside South Korea are watching carefully. Will the legal process stay the course? Will political winds shift yet again? Or will Yoon Seok-yeol become the first former president in South Korean history to be held fully accountable, without pardon, without exemption, and without compromise? For now, the path forward is clear. Yoon Seok-yeol is unlikely to be pardoned in the near future. His case marks a break from tradition, signaling that South Korea may be entering a new era, one in which political accountability is no longer optional, even for the highest office in the land. Whether this moment becomes a permanent feature of South Korea's democracy or a temporary exception remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the days when former presidents could rely on clemency appear to be over. The world is watching, and time as always will tell.